and welcome to episode 17 of the Silver Screen Show. I'm joined here by Hiftu, who's
Hello.
back for her second episode, right?
Yep.
How are you? How are you doing?
Good, I'm good. Excited to be back, finally.
Fantastic. Now, I think this is the first episode where the guys haven't been here, so it's just ladies' night tonight. And we'll be talking about Dunkirk and Baby Driver. So first we're going to go with Baby Driver. So just a little wrap up of the plot. So we have Baby, who's a very talented getaway driver, and he also suffers from tinnitus, which is like a ringing in your ears. So he listens to music to drown that out, and people find that a bit weird, and people point it out quite a lot during the film. So he works for Doc, Kevin Spacey's character, and he works on the heists, and along the way he finds a girl, falls in love, and then things take a bit of a dark turn, a bit of a violent turn, and things are a little bit out of hand.
I think it's very much sort of my first take on it when I saw the trailer and when I saw the film even was that it kind of felt a bit like sort of Kick-Ass meets Drive in a way, sort of with the sort of action kind of sequences, but then obviously the driving part, the role of the driver, sort of it kind of had that element to it. But I think what's Ansel Elgort. I think when I first saw him in The Fault in Our Stars, I wasn't a huge fan, I've got to say, but I think he definitely won me over in this film.
I was very much the same. I saw him in The Fault in Our Stars and the Divergent series as well as Triss's brother, and I thought this guy seems a little bit weak, a bit whiny, but he's really come out quite strong.
And I think that kind of, because I think he is generally quite, he's a natural actor, but I think this time it definitely went in his favour. Whereas before, that subtlety didn't really do much for me, but I think, he definitely played a really strong character in this, and that subtlety worked.
Strong, silent type.
Yeah, exactly. And it was more about, obviously, he's kind of, he sits there with his earphones basically plugged in his ears the entire time, listening to like a playlist and a whole host of things. And I think, definitely it's sort of those small actions which kind of add to his characterization. But I've got to say that we were discussing this earlier on. I was saying how I did enjoy the film, but it was lacking some. It was lacking that sort of that stardust quality, the thing that makes you think about it the next day, and do you know what I mean? But
I need to go see it again.
I know some people, especially some other reviewers who've gone to see it quite a few times now, and I'm kind of surprised by that, because I felt like there were some scenes which I felt, kind of brought me to the edge of my seat, and I wanted that momentum to keep going, but then there were some scenes where I felt,
I feel like for me, over time, it lost quite a lot of the initial shock factor. So the first scene's really, really hard hitting. The music is great, the camera work is great, the driving is amazing, and then it follows through. Even when he's just walking down the street getting coffee, he's like dancing through. Everything is on the beat of the track, and going through the film, it kind of lost a bit of that. And I like going to the cinema, I like seeing films, so when you come out and you're like, yeah, that was really good, and then you start thinking about it, and as I thought more and more about it, it lost that kind of starry, like the rose tinted glasses came down, and I was like, oh. And for me, I didn't really like the Bats character played by Jamie Foxx.
Okay, so I remember we were discussing this as well. We were talking about who was more believable. I mean, for me, I went to see this with a friend, and they were saying that they said, because I was like, I don't really know how to feel about this. I think everyone, it had some of the best actors in Hollywood starring in this film, so it had very high expectations. I think everyone did the best they could with that script. The dialogue, I have to say, was terrible. I thought it was some of it was very cliche and cheesy. I understand the film was meant to be sort of a funny take on, sort of a parody. I still think dialogue needs to be good, even if it is going to be something like that. So as I was saying, so my friend said, Kevin Spacey is a great actor, but Jamie Foxx was the best performer in this, and I actually have to say I agree. I feel like Jamie Foxx, every time I saw him play his character, I was never really disappointed, or I don't know, I just felt he added that extra punch to the film, whereas everyone else was just kind of going along with it. But I know you thought he just came across as crazy and mental, which he was.
But it's a common thing. Like going back to Suicide Squad, my opinion of Harley was that it's so overplayed, and that's not necessarily her fault. And in this case, it's not necessarily Jamie Foxx's fault. It's the dialogue that they're given, and it's just a common portrayal of someone who's a little bit criminally insane. And the lines that they're given just remove me, and I think, cringe, really? Would you say that? And I did feel that John Berthel, who plays one of the characters at the beginning in the first heist, he doesn't come back, and I thought he could have played that same character.
Yeah.
You didn't really have a need for Jamie Foxx to be there. I understand he's definitely a contrast to the very flat other characters in the film. So I understand your point of view, but still, he just kind of...
I just felt when I saw him, I was expecting something exciting to happen, and although I think his performance was good, yes, perhaps that was he was just another crazy, adding the crazy factor to the film, because everyone else was, I mean, for Robert, it's pretty level-headed, if you can say that.
True.
If you can say that.
Criminals,
but
they were very level-headed, very straight thinking.
But when Jamie Foxx, are we allowed to talk about spoilers, by the way?
We try and reduce it.
Right.
A little bit.
Okay. Well, this doesn't really give much away, but when Jamie Foxx is speaking to John Hamm, and he's trying to get into his psyche, and he's like, you're just a Wall Street runaway guy, blah blah. And so when he said that, suddenly I realised it made me think that this is kind of like Mad Men on the Run. It's everyone has some sort of escapism in this story, and I also felt like that didn't necessarily work for me.
Everyone has that history that they're trying to run away from.
Yeah, and I wasn't convinced by that necessarily. But yes, going back to believable characters, the girlfriend, so we were also talking about this as well. And, yes, fair enough if your boyfriend walks in with 5 of his criminal friends, you're not, the first thing you're going to say when your boyfriend says to you, well, do you want to run away with me? You probably give it a moment, to ponder over it.
Maybe not.
But Lily James, she's just like, yeah, sure, I've got nothing going on in my life.
Yeah, I mentioned that I wrote, go on our blog page, silverscreenshare.com. I wrote a review for Baby Driver, and I included that as, saying that she follows him no matter what. And I feel like if you've known, realistically, I mean, I know films are a bit of escapism in themselves, you think, I've known this guy for a couple of days, or however long the film is actually set over. Do I want to run away with him now that he's just walked in with 3 criminals and they look kind of dodgy and he looks really scared and he's clearly been lying to me about something. So I completely understand that, and I get that.
Yes, I mean, it's not meant to be realistic.
No,
it is. But I feel, I don't know, I was disappointed by the sort of, I think there was a lot that could have been done about developing her character. I think it'd be really interesting if we would have just been able to get a little bit of backstory to her character, just an understanding of what else she likes to do, what else interests her, and I just felt sad
other than songs with her name in it.
Yeah, and wanting to drive off, in a car she can't afford, to a place she doesn't know where she's going to. So other than those things, I felt like, it'd be, there were only 2 female leads in it, if you could call it that, and I felt both of them had very little depth, and they could have been developed a lot better and added a lot more to the story than they had. So that was that. But do we want to talk about the bit where, no, this will be a spoiler actually, it's near the end where Kevin Spacey...
Oh, yeah. No, probably not.
No.
I mean, there's a couple of times where people in the film switch instantly. And you don't understand why. I guess like in his case, he has a soft spot for Baby, sees him as a kind of protege or something, but yeah, it does seem that it's just a way to lead the plot in a different direction.
Yeah, I feel like it could have it had a lot of potential, but for me, I felt, especially near, halfway through, it felt very rushed, and it almost felt as though 3 different writers had sort of mashed it all together, and they were like, okay, the release date is this date, we need to, follow up with this deadline, let's just go for it, and so...
So have you got a short 3 or 4 word review for it?
I would say my first word would be disappointing. Sadly. I don't really have 3 or 4 word review. I'd say it's disappointing, but it definitely is worth a watch.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so difficult for me to say because I found it very enjoyable but confusing at times. It wasn't that the film was bad. It was just it lost its focus.
Yeah.
So it's definitely worth seeing, but don't go in there with high hopes.
Yeah, I'd definitely say watch it. Watch for cars and guns.
Yeah.
That's what you're going in for. That's what you get, and it's got a decent
and the soundtrack.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to our next Dunkirk. So this only came out yesterday. We both managed to go.
I know. I think we went to the same screen. Yeah.
Same time. Both came out like, right, seen it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. So, quick overview. It is the story of the Dunkirk evacuation, which was actually a bit of historical background to this as well. It's Operation Dynamo, and also known as the Miracle of Dunkirk, where the operation was decided upon during 1940. Decided to evacuate the troops that were surrounded and stuck at the beach at Dunkirk. And this included Allied troops, so French, Belgian, Dutch, as well as the British. And you had around 400,000 troops who were stranded in that region, and 338,000 made it back. Bearing in mind that the whole evacuation was over about 8 days. On the first day, only 7,000 people were evacuated. So over the next week, you had 330,000 people getting evacuated with over 800 boats and ships that were all British and Allied forces. And I want to put a number into perspective a little bit. During the French campaign, they lost 68,000 soldiers. And that is, if you've ever been to the O2 in Greenwich, that's 3 times the capacity of the O2 of people that were lost in that very, very short time. And you had 693 British ships and 226 sank in that time.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult time of our history, and it's definitely a difficult thing to portray because Christopher Nolan focuses on the human aspect of it and what happened to the soldiers. And there's been a little bit of criticism saying that it downplays the French involvement. So the French were the rear guard, keeping the Germans at bay so the evacuation could happen. But then you also have the fact that Hitler ordered a halt, which is thought of as his biggest mistake during the war because it allowed the evacuation. He just thought, they're going to leave continental Europe, they're never going to come back. But they came back, obviously. And so they had 40,000 French who surrendered after the evacuation as well. And obviously the French aren't looking at this representation very well. So let's move on to your review of it.
Yes, so again, we were talking about this briefly last night after both of us had been to see it. And I mean, I'm a huge fan of Nolan movies generally. Like, if I know he's directed something, I'm going to go and see that regardless. With this, I think I really enjoyed it, and I think it was great cinematically, and I enjoyed the division of areas in which it had been shot, and trying to bring together the 3 different stories of, what was happening on land, at the beach, what was happening at sea, and what was happening in the air when the RAF were fighting. And so I thought that was really interesting to watch. But I would say I didn't really feel connected necessarily with the story, but now looking into it, I don't think it was made for, there wasn't really one particular character whose story I felt I was following throughout.
Yeah.
But then I think it was almost like watching sort of a docudrama in a way, but obviously purely dramatic, and you know, none of it was, you know, it was just a retelling of stories which people have passed down over the years. But yeah, it kind of felt like I was watching a docudrama, which isn't a bad thing, but I felt if there was someone's story to follow, or someone to just, I didn't necessarily, I felt like I was rooting for everyone, but not one particular person, and I think I would have liked that. But then maybe it's just the kind of audience I am. I quite enjoy watching things where there are a few main characters, and you get to follow them through rather than several, because in this case there were quite a lot,
yeah.
You know, but so I guess
because you had 2 pilots, you had a captain of a yacht, which was one of the civilian vessels that were used for the evacuation, and then you had a couple of young boys on the beach. So you had Tommy, played by Fionn Whitehead, who's very, very new. I looked him up on IMDb. There's about 3 titles behind his name. I was not impressed by Harry Styles being in it. I don't understand why.
Oh, not impressed by him being in it, as in...
Why? I don't...
But what did you think of his acting?
I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah.
That, you know, he didn't go over the top. You definitely got an impression of the desperation, because, you know, the week that they had on that beach, obviously they've made several attempts to get off the beach. Each one, like 4 or 5 times, the boat has sunk, or, you know, they've been denied access onto the boat, and they are getting desperate because they want to survive, they want to go home, and you definitely got that from him. It was just, if you thought that Ed Sheeran being in Game of Thrones was annoying, this annoyed me even more.
Yes, there have been a few bizarre cameos, but in this case, Harry Styles actually plays quite a meaty role. Like, you know, I was just saying, you know, when I came out of the cinema, I was like, wow, I didn't really realize, because he's not in the trailer.
No.
And so I didn't realize he has more of a spoken part than Fionn Whitehead, who, you know, essentially the main character, I guess you could say, because we see him from start to finish. And so actually I was pleasantly surprised by his acting, but he definitely has had an acting coach with him the entire... There's no way you could be in a Christopher Nolan movie and not have had some serious training.
Yeah.
I am also a bit annoyed, but, you know...
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to be in a film alongside people like Kenneth Branagh and Tom Hardy... You need some beef behind you. That was the other thing. When Tom Hardy put on the mask, all I could hear in my head was Bane.
Bane. That's exactly what. Every time he put on the mask, it's like, first of all, I'm thinking Bane. Second of all, was he doing a Scottish accent? I couldn't really pin his, because the only time we hear him speak really is when he has the mask on it, because obviously he's speaking to his, you know.
No, I don't think so. But he's definitely putting on a slightly posher voice, I think, because I think people, my friend would hate me for saying this, but people see the RAF as being quite an elite part of the services. So, you know, I don't want to say a higher class or anything like that, but they were... a lot of them were actually very well educated as well, because they had to do, like he was doing on his pad, he was doing a lot of calculations and things like that. So I think he was just putting on a little bit of a posher voice. Really?
Because I kept hearing Scottish, but then you can be Scottish and posh, so... Speaking of connection though, it's interesting, because I was saying I felt there was a lack of connection, but I feel the character I felt most connected to was actually Tom Hardy's character, because, you know, he's up there in the air for an hour, and he's fighting, and he's, you know, he's protecting everyone. He's doing everything he can in his power, and you kind of, you know, it's only until the end you realise what he's doing, you know, when he's making a note of, you know, how many gallons of fuel he's used and whatnot. And it's quite, it's quite heart-wrenching actually when you see what he's been doing for the past hour.
Yeah.
So I feel if I had to say if there was a character I was most connected to, it would be him. Again, going back to sort of, you know, discussing how cinematically it was put together, I think, you know, there's very little dialogue in the film, and it doesn't need it.
Exactly.
Just because there was so much going on, obviously, at the time. And
it's the gravitas of the situation in itself. It speaks for itself. You don't need people talking.
Yeah, and it's the action, and obviously, you know, you've got Hans Zimmer's compositions, which just, speak for itself. Yeah. And there was one particular one, I think, it was used at the beginning when you see the two boys carrying one of the dead bodies along, and they're carrying it along so that they can also get on the boat to to leave and go back home. And there's that sort of that humming. It starts off with this humming noise, and it's the kind of noise almost you sometimes hear when you have a headache. I don't know if it's really. I felt it was really well put together, and then the build up to it kind of, you know, it follows the sound of every movement, you know, the ship crashing, the bombs dropping, you know, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
Going back to the structure, actually, as you said, with the land, air and sea. So we have 3 different time periods that we're looking at: a week on the beach, an hour in the air, and a day on the sea. And it represents how each perspective is very subjective. You don't know what's happening anywhere else. You don't have a phone that you can just call up and say, hey, you almost over the channel yet? You're on the beach, you don't know what's happening. There was the German Air Force called the Luftwaffe was basically assigned the job of stopping the evacuation, which is why you had the dogfights in the air and you had the bombers and things like that. And a lot of those fights happened out at sea. So the guys on the beach don't know anything about it, which is why you had like a pilot being berated at the end. And even in history, like back then, the troops that came back were very angry with the RAF, saying, what did you weren't there, why didn't you help? Which is where Winston Churchill stepped in and said, in his famous "We shall fight them on the beaches" speech, he spoke about the role of the RAF in getting people evacuated, which I thought was good. And then you have a connection of all 3 perspectives, and it gives you the larger picture of what actually happened at Dunkirk, and you have where some of the characters overlapped, and it started off for me a little bit confusing. I was like, why is it dark there and light here? But then when it all came together and it showed you all of that perspective, it was quite heavy for me, actually.
It's one of those films that gets you, that you leave and you go back, you leave and you think about it for quite a few days after you've seen it, and it's very much one of those ones that you always think about in hindsight, and you're like, okay, that makes sense, or now I understand that, or, you know, because I feel like at the time and that's why it requires so little dialogue, because it's all about the visuals and what's happening and piecing those together. I definitely didn't feel confused, unlike some people I know who they said they just felt confused. Like, well, I mean, you have to give it a chance. It's not it definitely doesn't feed you bits of information. You just have to see, and it very much is made in such a way so that if you were there at the beach at that time, or if you were up, it's made to make you feel as though you're part of it. I definitely felt, I know it sounds so strange and probably so pretentious, but I actually did feel just as exposed as the people at the beach. And, you know, there's a scene where Cillian Murphy kind of, you know, they give him a cup of tea and he takes shelter in the, you know, inside the boat. And for a moment you actually feel sheltered from and safe. And then suddenly it switches back to the boys at the beach, and you just see them watch this man walk into the water. And
that, I was going to say, that was, for me, was one of the more powerful shots. Like, he basically loses faith that anyone's going to come and save him, takes off all of his stuff and walks into the water to swim the channel back. And you think, that is how desperate people are getting. I definitely liked that part. And I went with my dad, and we were discussing it afterwards, and he said, did you ever feel that on the scenes in the channel that you were rocking, and you can tell the camera work. It's kind of bobbing like you're actually going with the waves while in the boat, and it's really, really immersive. Like I was shedding a tear by the end of it. I felt very connected. I have family connections go back to World War II as well, so I always like seeing things like this. And I think it was portrayed very, very well. For if you're just looking at the perspective of the men on the beach and the RAF pilots and the people who were brought in, the civilians who were brought in, I think it was beautifully done. Really, really, really well done.
Speaking of, some of the other criticisms sort of I read and that I read about, I think we were talking about earlier about, it's a historical film, and obviously Christopher Nolan has tried to. The characters are fictional, but historians have said that actually they're quite realistic for given the roles that they were given. But there are certain. It wasn't just British troops who were. Who were stuck on that beach at the time. You had the French, obviously, but a lot of people say it kind of undermines some of the contributions that other troops might have made. So, for example, the Royal Indian Army Service, which was part of the British Empire at the time.
Yes, yeah.
There was something like, out of the hundreds of thousands who were stranded there were only a few hundred, which is quite a small number. But a lot of people said that their contribution made the difference between them winning or losing the war overall.
Yeah.
And to have perhaps just a glimpse. There's only so much you can do with a 2.5-hour film, which is
represented. It is 2.5 hours.
Yeah. So it's quite long as it is, but to at least have had a glimpse or just a moment to, I guess, acknowledge the work that others had done to ensure that, the British troops were able to go back home and then continue the fight would have meant quite a lot. So so it's quite an interesting.
Yeah, some people think that without Dunkirk we wouldn't have been able to win the Battle of Britain, wouldn't have survived the Blitz, wouldn't have been able to regroup had we not evacuated that many troops out of Dunkirk. People call it the turning of the tide of the war and things like that. So yeah, I definitely appreciate what you say there.
Yeah, and also you only see one black soldier there. I think it's the scene where
there's a few. I recognised it when there was some French.
Yeah, it's the scene where they're trying to get on the boat and
they were trying to get onto the mole. So the mole is like the separation on the beach, and they use it as a pier. And there were some French troops. There's a group of black troops in that French.
I only saw one black character.
It is about it's a few, and they
and
are
so again,
extras.
And so again, a lot of historians have said that, there were actually a lot more, black, soldiers fighting there than there was depicted in the film. So I guess you'll always have that kind of debate and the questioning of those kind of areas, especially with a film which is trying to, recreate history.
Yeah.
So, I think they are interesting and valid points.
It's dependent on, because he's looking at a subjective view rather than an all-encompassing historical retelling. I think you have to leave some of those things out. There's subtle descriptions of the involvement. So there's but when Kenneth Branagh and the other colonel are discussing, they're talking about the French and how either they've fallen or they've surrendered, how they're holding the line. And then at the beginning, there's a scene when the yacht is still in the harbour, and the British public didn't really know anything. To keep morale high, the government wasn't telling them anything, and so that subtly told you that the British public didn't really know anything about what was going on.
Yeah, I guess the point that these historians are perhaps making are that maybe through dialogue something should have been mentioned about the Indian Army's contribution, or even if there was just, because this film overall it's about the visuals, right? So it's about what you see and who you see in it, and so perhaps maybe even just seeing a group of Indian men, I don't know, for even like 5 seconds would have made all the difference to
possibly.
just kind of
I think the last thing that really struck me was the ambience in the cinema at the end. Everyone came into the cinema, they were chatting, laughing. I had guys behind me gossiping about their friends and things like that. Normal stuff that you go into the cinema. At the end, when the credits rolled, everyone left in absolute silence. And it felt like it had touched everyone a little bit and left them feeling a little bit somber, a little bit emotional, just seeing that desperation. I'm going to use that word a lot because that's what it was. It was desperate times. And it really got to everyone in the cinema, I think. I don't know if it was the same for you.
It was. Annoyingly, actually, I had a guy who was on his phone just one guy, but I feel like you'll always have one person in the cinema. But aside, and had he not been in my eye line, it wouldn't have made a difference, but that was quite annoying. Aside from that, though, or him, yes, I think, everyone came in, in a certain mood. It was Friday night, we're going to see a film. I think we all knew what to expect, but yes, I think the way it was, the ending especially, I mean, if you see it for the ending alone,
it's quite uplifting.
Yeah,
as well.
It's I would say it's bittersweet.
Yes.
Because you see what happens with, some of the characters and it kind of, somber is exactly the word I would use to describe that feeling. It's somber and it's bittersweet and it just leaves you feeling quite heavy, and that you see something incredible has been achieved under the most sort of desperate circumstances. I'm just going to steal all your words now. Somber and desperate. I'm like, I really need to try and think of a different word, but it was exactly. But it's just you see like it's 2.5 hours of miracle really, and every time something happens, you think, okay, this is it. It's going to happen. It's going to work out fine, and then something. Yeah.
And it definitely speaks to the services at the time, like the skill of the pilot and the strategy of the naval men and the engineers making the jetty. That actually happened as well. They were actually making their own ones.
I know, and I think
it's incredible.
Gosh, yeah, it is.
Okay, so we're gonna.
So we loved it.
Wrap that up. Short, 3 or 4 words.
3 or 4 words. Cinematic, captivating, heroic.
Yeah.
Which is a cliche word to use for something like this, but I feel it deserves that.
Yeah. I would say I shed a tear. I did.
Yeah.
And I'm glad they didn't go very Hollywood and actiony with it. I think that worked well for it. So now, that's the only 2 films we're going to talk about in a lot of depth. We're just going to go over a couple of other films that have been coming out this month and coming out in the next week or so. So we have Valerian in the City of 1,000 Planets. And this is director Luc Besson, who was known as the writer, I think, for The Fifth Element, which I loved. I loved that film. And you have special operatives Valerian and Laureline must race to identify the menace that is threatening Alpha. You interested in this one at all?
So I've seen posters for it. I've not seen the trailer.
Mainly
because I'm not interested in seeing the film. So
I've seen the trailer a couple of times on other visits to the cinema, and it does look like quite a spectacle. Maybe in the same way that like Jupiter Ascending was, and then the storyline kind of flopped a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Cara Delevingne is one of the leads in this film.
Yeah, she's Laureline.
I've not actually seen her. Have I seen her acting in any films? She was in Suicide Squad, right? But I didn't see that film. I don't know. This is just based on what I've heard. I've heard she's not great generally.
I think she hasn't really been given a chance to be great.
Yeah,
she's been in these...
perhaps she hasn't had a chance to mature, and I guess when you do go from being a supermodel to I mean it worked. There Hollywood and Bollywood and various mainstream areas of cinema have had it's been quite common for models to that model turned actor kind of label. It's quite common for that to happen, but I think if you are a supermodel and as well known as Cara Delevingne, I think it is difficult to kind of make that transition or be given that chance at least to impress people with your performances. But frankly speaking, I mean, I wasn't really interested in her when she was a model. I'm not really interested in seeing her as an actor.
That's
maybe that's just my own bias, but I'm not really interested. So that's me.
Okay, so make up your own mind. Spider-Man: Homecoming. I've already seen this, and I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it was going to be a kind of Tony Stark show featuring Spider-Man, but it turned out to be better than that.
Okay.
And I think we're going to talk about it a little bit more next time when the boys are back. The Beguilded is something we're both very interested in. So this is during the American Civil War, and a wounded soldier enters the school for girls in Virginia. And there's lots of jealousy, a bit of betrayal, and you were saying something very interesting about the previous film.
So I think this film had been made in 1971, I think, and Clint Eastwood stars in that film. He basically plays the role of Colin Firth in this film. And I read a really interesting review about it, and the review was...
Colin Farrell.
Sorry.
Colin Firth would have been interesting, though.
Yeah, I mean, he could play that,
might
but
be
he's
getting
not
a little bit old.
A little bit old, and he doesn't really do menacing, does he?
No.
Anyway, that's another discussion for another time. Colin Firth versus Colin Farrell, but yes, sorry, my bad. So this film was originally made in 1971, and I was reading a really interesting review about it, which was championing this the latest film, and it said it was really interesting because the Beguiled, this version kind of it focuses more on the complexities and the different characteristics of the 5 women. I think it's 5 women, and they all play different roles. So Nicole Kidman is I think she's the headmistress of the school, and then you have Kirsten Dunst playing quite a senior teacher, and then 3 other students, I think. So these are 5 different women who are playing different ages and are at different stages in their life. So from what I read, I heard that the previous film kind of focused on it almost made out as though the 5 women were sort of quite hysterical and just psychopaths in general, and just sort of general,
that view of women.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard that somewhere before. And so apparently it was very interesting to see sort of a woman's take on that. And I mean, just looking at the trailer alone, they don't seem anything far-fetched or less than slightly psychotic in a way, but there is more motivation behind their characters in this film,
rather than just being being like,
female
oh
my god,
disposition.
yeah, exactly. And whereas in the old film it was more about these women who are hungry for this man, and they'll go to any lengths to compete with each other, and it's just women versus women. Whereas in this one, it's very much you kind of get an understanding of these different women at their different stages, and kind of get an opportunity to delve into their psyche in a way, which I think is really interesting and I think is really important for a film in which 5, most of the characters are women. So very interesting.
So we'll definitely be seeing that one.
Yes.
And War for the Planet of the Apes. Now, I'm interested in seeing this one. I've seen the other 2. I saw the Mark Wahlberg version of the Planet of the Apes, seen the much older version. But apparently, you don't need to have seen any of them, any of the other ones. It works as a standalone film as well as part of a series.
Yeah,
it's very interesting.
Yeah, I got that impression from the trailer.
Yeah, and I've seen an interview with Andy Serkis, who I think is a very talented motion capture actor, and he describes the progression of Caesar throughout the films and things like that. And this film takes the war against the humans a little bit further. And the apes have lost a lot. They're looking for new homes, things like that. So it's supposed to be quite emotional, but it's still with a bit of action in it. So I saw the trailer, and I mean, I think I would go and see it if
there was nothing else on in the cinema. So I would still...
That's not what you want to hear.
So I would still use my hard-earned money to pay for a ticket to go and see this, but I don't know, I feel like it doesn't really have that kind of, I don't know, that's something special for me, yeah.
Okay, fair enough. We've got a couple of kids' films. We've got Despicable Me 3, Cars 3, and the Emoji Movie, which I'm mentioning here just because it sounds pure ridiculous. Multi-expressional emoji sets out on a journey to become a normal emoji. And I'm assuming there's a message behind it to say, what is normal? You're special in your own way, and it's going to be thrust in your face. But it's a kids' movie, so we can overlook that. We've got a comedy, The House. Parents set up illegal casino to pay for their daughter's college. I've seen trailers for this. It looks like it's got some
that sounds
funny pieces
mad.
in it. It does look absolutely crazy. I think Wish Upon and It Comes at Night are horrors and thrillers. I'm really interested in seeing It Comes at Night because I like Joel Edgerton as an actor, and it's one of those more confined pieces like 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Okay.
One of those, like, you're in a confined space and there's now a new threat, and in the outside world there's some supernatural threat to humans. And again, in a similar fashion to 10 Cloverfield Lane, you're going to ignore that for the film and concentrate on the emotions and slowly going a little bit stir crazy and insane. So I think that looks really interesting. And The Big Sick. A couple deals with cultural differences and then a girl falls into a coma.
Well, that's a short and sweet synopsis of that. So I mean, I'm really intrigued by this. But at the same time, has it been released yet? I think it's been released in the US. And
I think it might be coming out in the next week.
Right,
if it
okay.
hasn't already, yeah.
Because from the reviews, or at least comments I've read online, I know that a lot of Western Asian women have a problem with this.
Okay.
I think a lot of people feel it's, if you've seen Master of None, and various other things in which you have like a Western Asian male lead and a white woman, I think people who are complaining about this have seen, a lot of those issues, if you like, cultural issues being overcome. And I think apart from Mindy Kaling, I guess, the Mindy Project, where else have we seen, sort of Western Asian women being represented, or do you understand what I mean? And so, I mean, I don't really know where I stand on this because I haven't really
thought about it much.
I haven't really had a great deal of time to think.
It's an issue?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I just thought issued. I was like, what, I'll deal with that another time. But it is interesting, and I think it is a valid point. So I think I'm intrigued to see it from both sort of perspectives, just for the story alone in itself and what happens after she goes into a coma.
There's I've seen clips and trailers, and there's quite a few awkward interactions between the main character and the girl's sort of, I guess racist is probably a bit strong, probably more just ignorant parents, and they ask these strange questions of him, and he's... Yeah, when the dad is like, we're really interested to talk to people about 9/11, and he's like, you've never spoken to anyone about 9/11? And he's just like, well, no, like, so I think it's going to be... Yeah, it takes a satirical view on those interactions that are quite awkward for people. I
mean, I laughed at the trailer, so I think it's going to be good. But yes, there's always a question of...
And All Eyes on Me is one that you've seen. I've seen
that. Yeah, I saw that film. I wasn't really interested initially, but I got to go to a special screening of it where... I've forgotten the lead actor's name, but he was there for a Q&A session afterwards. So I got the chance to see it, and I was hooked actually throughout. I thought it was really, really engaging, really interesting how... So in the film you get to see him from, his childhood up until the end when, he's killed. Okay. And I think it's really engaging from start to finish. How accurate it is, I couldn't tell you because I'm not a huge Tupac fan, and I don't know a great deal about his life and his story, but from what I saw, having done a quick search on Wikipedia, I know my sources are so reliable.
It has references.
It has references, yes. I definitely checked those as well. You know, and from like fans I spoke to, they said it was, you know, quite an accurate depiction. But yeah, I mean, I would say it's definitely worth a watch, even if you just want to see a good story, and also the kind of, I guess, even if it's not as true as possible to Tupac's story itself, I think it definitely says a lot about sort of the civil rights movement at the time, and well, that was, you know, I guess it's set in the 70s, but you know, it kind of shows you a follow-up of, you know, the kind of struggles that, you know,
the aftermath.
Yeah, the aftermath, and you know, that the American black community have faced in the USA, and how relevant that is to today. So I think it has some very interesting parallels, and definitely worth a watch if you just want to see it for an interesting story alone.
Okay, good. And I think last is Atomic Blonde. So the director is David Litch, who hasn't had a lot of directing jobs, but he's got a lot of stunt coordinator and stunt man jobs. Some big ones include like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the new ones, Born Legacy, Tron, X-Men, Triple X, Underworld, 300, quite a lot of films that have interesting cinematic approaches. And we've got Charlize Theron, James McAvoy, John Goodman, Eddie Marsan, another summer film for Sofia Boutella. And it is about an undercover MI6 agent who is sent to Berlin during the Cold War. More war epics coming out. And to investigate the murder of a fellow agent and recover a missing list of double agents. So it's already being pegged as the summer blockbuster at the moment. How
yeah, so I saw the trailer for this, and I'm not really sure what to expect. I think it's going to be more, so you know, the previous two films we were talking about, Baby Driver and Dunkirk, you know, one's action packed and one is historically, you know,
as accurate as
it possibly could be, is you know, and I feel like with Atomic Blonde it sits closer towards Baby Driver in the sense that I think we're going to get from that is more sort of entertainment and you know, the all guns blazing kind of action sequences and scenes. I love James McAvoy as an actor.
I love him.
I think he plays, you know, you know, complex guys quite well. I know that's such a weird thing to say because there's so many, but I think you know, he plays like the bad cop quite well in a good way. I don't really know what his role in this. I feel like he might not necessarily be the bad cop. I feel like Charlize Theron might be the.
Yeah, I think he's going to be there to help her in her investigation, but he's a kind of dangerous, bit menacing, but also with a backstory that might explain why he's that way. And I think he plays that part well. I didn't see it. I saw the trailers for Filth, which he was the main character in. Yeah,
and in Filth he was incredible. Yeah. And I wonder whether the character he plays in this is similar to that.
That's what I thought.
It's so strange because in Filth, you know, he plays a horrible character, but you're rooting for him the entire time, which is, you know, I feel like as an audience member, it's very difficult to, you know, make your audience feel that way towards you. You know, I'm like, I shouldn't like you, but I really do. And so in this, I feel, I don't really know where he'll be placed on that spectrum, but I think, I mean, I would like to see it mainly for his performance. Yeah.
So. Yeah, I think Charlize Theron is going to do well. I think this is going to be quite an actiony, quite heavy film. And she's done, you know, Mad Max. She's done Aeon Flux. She did Hancock. She's been in quite a few films where there's been action and a lot of stunts in that. So I think she's going to do really well. And I really like her as an actress as well. I think she does really well. Yeah,
I mean, I can't say I've seen many of her films. I actually haven't seen Mad Max yet, believe it or not. I will. It is on my list of things to watch. But from a few other films I've seen her in, I have, you know, I have been impressed with her. I do think she is sort of she's an action movie veteran now. She knows her stuff, and I think it's gonna be entertaining.
Okay, good. So I hope that helps you in picking some movies to see in the next couple of weeks. Thank you, Hiftu, for joining us once again.
Thank you for having me.
And make sure you go onto our Facebook, our Twitter, our website. Make sure you follow us. Make sure you follow LB24 TV. And thanks for joining us. Have a good night.
See ya.
Bye.